He said, "Mom, don't come to family dinner anymore. It's best for everyone." Just like that. After everything I built, after every sleepless night, every dollar I scraped to put food on his plate and a roof over our heads, he erased me with a text. I didn't cry. I didn't call. I just stood at the sink in my little kitchen in Charleston, my hands still wet from rinsing rice, and stared at my phone like it had just delivered a death notice. And maybe it had. Maybe it was the death of the illusion that love alone could ever be enough. But I'll tell you what it was really the beginning of. A revenge story unlike anything my son ever saw coming. They used to call me the Queen of King Street. Back in the day, I was the one who turned a 2-table bakery on the corner into a string of 12 full-service restaurants scattered across Charleston. I wasn't born into money, didn't marry into it either. My husband, Harold, was a high school history teacher with a brilliant mind and a kind heart. And when cancer took him at 43, I had a 10-year-old boy and no idea how to pay next month's rent. But I had recipes, I had hustle, and I had fire in my gut that told me if I didn't make something happen, nobody would do it for me. I baked through the night and sold out of the trunk of my old Buick the next morning. I fed construction workers before dawn and lawyers at lunchtime. I made every dollar count and folded every tip back into the dream. After 5 years, I opened my first brick and mortar, Morrison's Table. Just 12 seats, 1 oven, and me doing everything but wash the windows. And sometimes that too. I missed PTA meetings and school recitals. I wasn't the mom who brought cupcakes to class, but Trent never went to bed hungry. He wore clean shirts and had new cleats for every baseball season. I didn't take vacations, didn't date, didn't rest. Not until Morrison's became Morrison Holdings. By the time Trent graduated from Duke, I had 7 locations and 60 employees. He came home with a business degree and ambition in his eyes. He said he wanted to help grow the brand, and I handed him the keys like a proud fool. I signed him onto the board, gave him 35% equity over the course of 5 years, and sat in the back of every quarterly meeting like a mother cheering from the stands. He was smart. Too smart. That's the trouble with giving power to someone who never had to build anything with their own hands. They think leadership is a costume, not a responsibility. But I didn't see that yet. Not then. What I saw was a handsome young man in tailored suits giving TED Talks about legacy and family entrepreneurship. What I heard was him calling me the founder in press interviews and inviting me on stage for anniversaries. It felt like recognition, even if it came with fewer invitations to planning meetings and less say in strategic choices. But that's the thing about slow erasure. It doesn't feel like theft until you realize what's gone. By the time I was 70, I had become more of a symbol than a stakeholder. They still had my name on the company letterhead, but it was in small print, like I was a retired mascot, not the woman who'd built the damn thing from nothing. Trent told me to enjoy retirement. He said, "Mom, you've earned rest." But I didn't ask for rest. I asked for respect. And those are not the same thing. I remember the day I tried to voice concern about a new catering deal that didn't sit right with me. Trent smiled like I was a toddler interrupting grown-up talk and said, "Mom, it's taken care of." That was the beginning of my silence. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I realized no one in the room cared to listen anymore. Then came April, his wife. Polished, Instagram perfect, always 5 inches above reality in stilettos and fake praise. She once told a Charleston Gazette reporter that Elaine inspired the brand values, like I was some folklore character, not a living woman sitting 3 feet away. I should have seen the shift. The branding meetings started happening without me. Staff began referring to April as Mrs. Morrison, which was never my name, but apparently became hers overnight. I was slowly demoted from founder to ghost. But ghosts, as the old folks say, don't forget who killed them. Still, I smiled at Thanksgiving. I bought birthday presents for my grandson I wasn't allowed to hand-deliver. I sent fruit baskets when I heard Trent landed a new partnership. I swallowed my pride like cough syrup. Bitter and necessary. Because that's what mothers do, right? We love and we hope. We tell ourselves they'll come around, they'll remember, but memory is slippery, especially when ambition gets involved. The more successful Trent became, the more I became a threat to the narrative he was selling, that he built this on his own. So I stepped back. I let them rename the flagship restaurant without my approval. I let them host events I wasn't invited to. I even nodded politely when Trent said, "Mom, just enjoy life. Let us take care of the company now." He said it with a smile, the same smile he wore when he signed my voting rights over to himself for efficiency. It wasn't until the text came, "Don't come to family dinner anymore," that I understood the truth. He didn't just want to erase my influence. He wanted to erase me. But I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't going to plead. I was going to remember. And I was going to prepare, silently, patiently. Because unlike him, I don't start wars I don't intend to finish. It came on a Thursday afternoon. Charleston was quiet, almost too quiet. The way it gets before a storm that tears shutters off windows and leaves your world soaked in regret. I was standing at my kitchen counter, chopping mint for tea, when my phone buzzed. Just one message. "Mom, don't come to family dinner anymore. It's best for everyone." No explanation, no preamble, no warmth. I read it twice, then a third time. And when I opened the Morrison family group chat to check if anyone had said anything, nothing. Just silence. Not even an awkward emoji. Not a single soul had the spine to speak up. A few seconds later, April responded. Not with concern, not with sympathy, with a laughing emoji. The kind that says, "This is hilarious. Isn't she ridiculous?" The kind you send when you want the person on the other end to know that they've officially become a punchline. And just like that, 30 years of traditions ended. Not with a call or a confrontation, but with pixels on a screen. The Sunday dinners I cooked for decades, rain or shine, flu or heartbreak, holiday or not, they were erased with a thumb tap. Every pot roast, every pecan pie, every evening spent listening to Trent rant about high school drama or startup ideas, all gone, forgotten, dismissed like a burnt biscuit. No one asked me if I was okay. No one called to say, "Mom, that wasn't fair." Even my brother-in-law, Peter, who once called me the anchor of this family, left it on red. The same man I lent $5,000 to save his landscaping business didn't even send a thumbs up or a "you good." I took a screenshot, not to retaliate, just to remember. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Evidence is everything. Evidence of who stood by you and who let you drown in silence. I went back through the group thread, scrolled months and months, and suddenly I saw it all with new eyes. The birthday party photos I never received invites to. The 4th of July gathering I didn't even know happened. The family-only ski trip to Vail, where I saw April posing with my grandson in a parka I had mailed to him for Christmas. They weren't just excluding me. They were editing me out. I was watching my own family live out a version of life where I didn't exist, where I was just a ghostly credit card statement behind every glass of champagne. It's funny what you notice when you start connecting the dots. My bank account had odd debits, transfers to Morrison Admin Fund, a shell I didn't remember approving. The foundation I started for single mothers had posted a brand new $15,000 marketing campaign, yet I wasn't informed or consulted. But there was April again, in a slick promotional video, wearing designer heels and saying the foundation was inspired by her own journey. Her journey. She married into the Morrison name and went shopping with it. By the time the 3rd glass of mint tea was cold beside me, I had moved past sadness, past anger. There was only one thing left, clarity. And with it came a truth I had tried not to say out loud for years. They never planned to let me stay. Once I stopped being useful, once I stopped opening my checkbook or drawing crowds, they decided I was in the way. And not just in the company, in the family. You know what's funny? I used to think love guaranteed a place at the table. It doesn't. Contribution doesn't either. You can pour your soul into people, raise them, build them a legacy, and still end up uninvited to dinner. And maybe, just maybe, someone reading this right now knows exactly what I mean. If you've ever been the one who gave everything, time, money, sweat, love, and still got left out of the group photo, you're not alone. Let me know in the comments if this has ever happened to you. I read every word, Because people like us, we don't talk enough. We stay quiet to keep the peace, to avoid making a scene. But silence doesn't stop betrayal. It only makes it easier for them to pretend we never mattered. That night, I didn't call Trent. I didn't fight. I made a decision. If they wanted to cut me out, I'd become the sharpest thing they'd ever held. And here's the thing. They forgot who I was before I was mom, before I was grandma, before I was just the founder in old press releases. I was Elaine, widow at 37, self-made at 42, debt-free at 45. And by 55, I employed more people than anyone on our block. I didn't build a business to beg for a seat at the table. I built it so no one could take away mine. And if they thought a text message could end me, they were about to learn what legacy really means. Because while they were laughing at family dinners, sipping on wines bought with my dividends, I was already turning the key to a door they didn't even know existed. And behind that door was something they'd never expected, a woman who hadn't been erased, just underestimated. I didn't cry. That surprised me. After that message, the one where Trent cut me out of Sunday dinner like I was expired milk, I didn't shed a tear. Not when April posted family photos of the new housewarming brunch I wasn't invited to. Not when the company newsletter went out listing our founding legacy without my name in it. But I did feel something, a slow, quiet ache, like the numbness that sets in before frostbite. Not sharp, just empty. And when you've poured everything you are into a family, your time, your voice, your dreams, silence hurts worse than shouting. At first, I thought it was just a phase. Maybe Trent was overwhelmed. Maybe April was being April. But then I got the letter from the bank. It came in a sleek envelope, addressed in bold print, not handwriting. That alone should have been my first red flag. Inside was a notice. Authorization granted to Morrison Holdings Executive Board for discretionary use of Founder Trust Account. My signature was on the document, except it wasn't mine. I stared at that slanted E in Elaine and knew instantly it was forged. Sloppily, too. Whoever did it didn't even try to mimic my loops. It was the signature of someone who believed they'd never be questioned. And I knew exactly who that someone was. I picked up the phone to call the trust manager. His assistant answered, and after verifying who I was, she hesitated and said, Mrs. Morrison, I believe your son is the designated contact for your accounts now. That's what the paperwork indicates. I sat there staring at the sun-faded photo of my late husband on the mantel. He would have seen this coming, wouldn't he? Harold always said, Elaine, the ones who smile while they sideline you are the most dangerous. I used to think he was paranoid. Now I knew he was prophetic. I asked the assistant to send me copies of all recent authorizations. I knew the law. I knew I had rights. And when the envelope came 2 days later, I spent the entire evening sitting at my kitchen table with a highlighter and a hard truth. They'd already taken almost everything. The company credit cards were being used to fund client development retreats at luxury resorts. My charitable foundation was issuing checks to consultants that didn't exist. And worst of all, my name had been legally listed as inactive founder on state records. I had been erased not just emotionally, but on paper. And if you think that stings less, yes, you're wrong. When the world no longer sees you as relevant, they stop looking for your absence. But the part that broke me? It was a voicemail. I hadn't spoken to my grandson Noah in months. He was 19, off at college, busy with life. Or so I thought. One night, as I sat on the porch, staring out at the street I'd lived on for 40 years, my phone buzzed. One missed call. No ID. Then came the voicemail. Grandma, I'm not supposed to talk to you. Dad said you're confused lately. He told people you have early dementia. I didn't believe it at first, but then, I don't know, you've been so quiet, not showing up. People started acting like you weren't around anymore. I guess I did too. I'm sorry, I just didn't know what to believe. And then, after a pause, I miss you. That was the moment something inside me cracked. not in rage, not in despair, but in clarity. Trent wasn't just trying to remove me from the business. He was rewriting the narrative of who I was. He was casting me as unstable, mentally fading, incapable, so that when he took everything, no one would question it. It was the final blow, being declared irrelevant by the very people you built your life around. I sat up that night rereading old emails, digging through receipts, pulling up legal documents I hadn't thought about in years. And that's when I found it. Buried in a red folder from 2004 marked contingency was a financial instrument I'd completely forgotten I created with Harold before he passed. A private emergency trust held in a separate bank, accessible only if mismanagement or fraud was detected. It was still active, untouched, and I had full control. Suddenly, I wasn't powerless. I was a loaded chamber. All those years, Trent assumed I'd gone soft. That age made me slow, that being quiet meant I wasn't watching. He forgot the first rule of dealing with mothers like me: silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. And if he thought the last few years were easy, he'd soon learn just how dangerous a woman becomes when she has nothing left to lose, except the truth. I used to think it was just sadness I was carrying around, but sadness is gentle. It still holds on to hope. What I felt now was something else, clarity laced with steel, the kind that forms when a woman finally realizes no one is coming to save her, especially not the people she raised. It had been 3 days since I found the red folder. It had Harold's handwriting on the tab. Contingency. If it all goes to hell. That was my husband. No fluff, no euphemism. He never trusted easy. He used to say, "Hope for the best. Plan like they'll turn on you anyway." When he died, I thought that kind of thinking was too cynical. I was wrong. Inside that folder was the contract for a secondary emergency trust, established in both our names but locked under my solo authority. I'd forgotten about it. 20 years is a long time to forget anything, but God bless the paper trail. There was $3.2 million sitting in an untouched account. No connection to Morrison Holdings, no access from Trent, no board oversight, just me. And just like that, the woman they thought they had stripped of everything was holding the knife again. But I didn't call a lawyer. Not yet. I didn't call the media or storm the boardroom. That would have been too easy and too loud. No, I called someone else, someone I hadn't spoken to in 17 years. Her name was Caroline Ashford, and the last time we talked, we were seated across from each other in a courtroom, fighting over zoning rights for our restaurants. She won that case. She was brilliant and ruthless and elegant, the kind of woman who makes men stutter and women sit straighter. She also happened to be a forensic accountant turned investigator, now semi-retired but still very much in demand when a discreet mess needed cleaning up with velvet gloves and a blade. The voicemail I left her was simple. "Caroline, it's Elaine Morrison. I believe I have a puzzle that would interest you, and I believe it's time I stopped pretending to be invisible." She called back within the hour. "You're not invisible, Elaine," she said. "You're just playing small. That ends today." The next morning, she arrived at my porch in a navy trench coat and sunglasses that probably cost more than my dining table. She didn't say much, just gave me a long, assessing look and said, "Tell me everything." So I did. I told her about the forgery, the revoked access, the stolen foundation funds, the fake dementia story, the manipulated bank authorizations. I showed her Jonah's voicemail, the bank statements, the screenshots of April's shopping sprees funded by corporate wellness budgets. And Caroline didn't blink. By the end of the second hour, she had a notepad full of scribbles and a glint in her eye that made me sit up straighter. "You were smart to wait," she said. "They're exposed now. Arrogance always leaves a trail. You gave them just enough rope." "What now?" I asked. "Now," she said, "we tighten it." We created 3 folders that day. Folder A, financial abuse of an elder. Folder B, charitable fraud and misappropriation of nonprofit funds. Folder C, corporate malfeasance and tax evasion. Each document was time-stamped, sourced, backed with screenshots, receipts, emails, and silent witness testimony from former staff. people Caroline knew how to reach quietly. For the first time in months, maybe years, I sat back and let myself breathe. It wasn't just about taking back what was mine anymore. It was about reclaiming who I was before they decided to rewrite me. Because that's the worst kind of betrayal, isn't it? Not just stealing your money or your name, but stealing the story of who you are, of what you built, of what you survived. Trent thought I'd never fight back because he thought I needed his approval to exist. He didn't understand. Mothers like me, we don't raise children to destroy us, but we don't crumble when they try. That evening, I made tea, sat by the window, listened to the sound of the wind through the crepe myrtle tree Harold planted in '98. I thought about the years, the wait, the silence I'd endured for the sake of peace, the birthdays I'd been erased from, the meetings they told me not to bother attending. I wasn't sad anymore. I was wide awake. And I knew exactly what kind of woman I had become. Not bitter, not vengeful, just done begging to be seen. They had mistaken my silence for surrender. But what they didn't know, and what they were about to learn, was that silence, in the right hands, becomes a weapon sharper than any scream. The strange thing about rebirth, it doesn't start with fireworks. It starts in silence. Mine began with a black notebook, a burner phone, and a password-protected folder labeled Truth. That's all Caroline and I needed. There were no dramatic declarations, no courtroom standoffs, no midnight confrontations, just checkmarks on a list and evidence piling like snow, quiet, cold, irrefutable. We worked out of my sunroom. Caroline brought her laptop. I brewed chamomile tea. Every day for a week, we reviewed one folder at a time. Cross-checked offshore transfers, flagged duplicate vendors, logged fraudulent expenses tied to the Morrison Foundation. It wasn't just sloppy, it was arrogant. $2,900 spent at a luxury spa labeled as Youth Outreach. $14,000 for a consulting firm registered to April's cousin in Florida. An entire $85,000 donation redirected into a property flip, owned by Trent's holding company. I didn't need to raise my voice. The numbers spoke loud enough. Jonah kept helping from the inside, feeding us screenshots of internal communications. The boy was sharper than I had dared to hope. He'd been silently documenting things for his senior ethics seminar at college, never realizing his class project would soon serve as a linchpin in something far bigger. One evening, he called. "Grandma," he said quietly, "April just bought a second Tesla using the foundation credit card. Did she really think no one would notice?" I asked. "She thinks no one cares," he replied. "She thinks you're done." I smiled, but not with joy, with understanding. That was their fatal error. They believed silence meant surrender, but I wasn't surrendering. I was building. While Caroline drafted the preliminary legal strategy, I made a few calls of my own. Quiet ones. Strategic ones. I wasn't just gathering firepower. I was building alliances. I called Susan, my former director of HR who'd been unceremoniously let go when April claimed she was resistant to culture change. I called Luther, my longtime vendor liaison who mysteriously lost his contract after 17 years. I called Denise, my retired sous chef, who'd once told me, "When they stop including you, it's because they want your silence." Each of them remembered. Each of them still had files, messages, receipts, and each of them said the same thing. "We were waiting for you to come back." They didn't want revenge. They wanted restoration. That's when I knew. This wasn't about payback. It was about rebuilding something worthy. Caroline drafted a detailed audit package encrypted and time-stamped. One copy sent to the IRS whistleblower program, another to a respected journalist I once mentored through a local women's business collective. No threats, no leaks, no dramatics, just truth. Handed over with surgical precision. It felt clean, not like revenge, like reclamation. When Jonah visited that weekend, he brought croissants and his laptop. We sat at the kitchen island, just the two of us, going through timelines. "I can't believe how much they took," he said, scrolling through a spreadsheet. "They didn't just take money," I replied. "They took identity, reputation. They turned legacy into leverage." He looked at me, voice soft. "You're not just taking it back, you're rebuilding it better." He was right. For so long, I'd begged to be seen again, as a mother, as a founder, as a woman with value. But now, I didn't need them to see me. I saw myself again, and that was more than enough. By week's end, the dominoes had begun to lean. The foundation's primary donor suspended funding, pending review. A regulatory agency flagged Morrison Holdings for irregular nonprofit filings. One of April's photos, standing in front of a $7,000 wine fridge captioned "Grateful Thursdays," went viral in the worst way after someone online connected it to a pediatric cancer fund she managed. I didn't lift a finger. I didn't make a call. I had already done my part. Quietly, completely, unapologetically. And the rest? That was just gravity. One evening, I received a text from Trent. "Mom, we need to talk. Things are spiraling. I know you're behind this. Please call me." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Nothing that wouldn't unravel the stillness I had worked so hard to protect, because silence had become my language now. Not out of fear, but out of power. It wasn't about punishing him. It was about proving that no one, not even your own child, gets to rewrite you without a fight. It didn't happen in a courtroom. It didn't happen with cameras or headlines or screaming matches in boardrooms. The fall came the way truth always does, quietly, then all at once. The IRS never called me. They didn't need to. The audit spoke for itself. The moment Carolyn submitted the files, we stepped back, let gravity do what it was designed to. The first public notice was buried deep in a business ethics bulletin. Morrison Holdings under investigation for nonprofit financial mismanagement. 3 days later, April deleted all her social media accounts. 4 days after that, Trent was placed on temporary leave by the board. The family trust account was frozen. Employees began whispering. Journalists started digging. But I didn't gloat. I didn't text him, "I told you so." I didn't even watch the press conference where Trent tried to defend the indefensible. Because by that point, I had moved on. I was sipping tea in the back garden. The crepe myrtle Harold planted was blooming, soft pink blossoms against early summer light. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel erased. I felt whole. Jonah called that afternoon. "They're freaking out," he said. "Dad's trying to claim ignorance, but there's no way he didn't know. Everyone's jumping ship." "I'm not surprised," I said. "They're scared of you, Grandma." "I'm not scary," I said. "I'm just a mirror. They don't like what they see." And truly, I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt clean. Because the thing about silent battles is this: you don't win them with shouting. You win them by surviving with dignity. Later that week, the board issued a statement thanking Ms. Elaine Morrison for her foundational role in the creation and long-term success of Morrison Holdings. Foundational. After years of being pushed aside, brushed off, erased, that single word felt like a stone placed back in the house they tried to tear down. No one from the family called. Trent didn't apologize. April never reached out. But one afternoon, I got a letter. It was handwritten, unsteady but sincere. "Dear Grandma, I didn't know what to believe. Dad made it seem like you were fading away, like you didn't want to be part of the family anymore. I feel so stupid now. But I remember the summers I spent in your bakery. I remember you letting me lick the batter and teaching me how to tell when cornbread is done by sound. I know now that you were never the one who left. They pushed you out. I'm sorry. If you'll let me, I want to come see you, Jonah." That letter meant more than any headline ever could. It told me that legacy isn't just about businesses or buildings. It's about memory, about truth, about the pieces of us that live on in the people we raise, even if they forget for a while. I set the letter down beside my cup of tea and let myself feel it all. Grief, gratitude, relief. Not loud, not dramatic, just real. And if you've ever sat in silence wondering if the people you raised even remember who you were before the wrinkles and the labels and the guilt trips, if you've ever felt invisible in a room you built with your own 2 hands, please know this. You are not forgotten. You are not erased. You are not alone. And if this story feels familiar to you, even a little, if it touches something you've carried quietly, I'd love to know. Tell me in the comments. You'd be surprised how many of us are walking the same quiet road. As for me, I started something new. Caroline and I launched a fund. Quietly, of course. It's called the Herald Fund, named after the man who believed in backup plans. It offers free legal support for women over 60 navigating financial manipulation or elder abuse. No PR campaign, no ribbon cutting, just quiet power, placed exactly where it's needed. The bakery on King Street, it's still there. I visit now and then, not as a founder, not as an icon, just as a woman who remembers the smell of flour at 5 a.m. and the feel of ownership in her bones. And every once in a while, someone recognizes me. An older woman will lean in, lower her voice and say, "You're Elaine Morrison, right? You built this." And I smile, not to be polite, but because it's true. Yes, I built this. Not just the bakery, not just the company, but the spine it took to walk away, rebuild, and never look back. There's a certain kind of grief that doesn't come with funerals or tears. It comes with realizing your best years were invisible to the people you loved the most. After the dust settled and the headlines faded, I found myself facing a quieter ache. The years they had forgotten, not because time swept them away, but because they chose to overlook them. The mornings I opened the bakery before sunrise, fingers numb, aprons soaked in flour. The PTA meetings I sat through even when I had payroll crises hanging over my head. The nights I worked the restaurant line until 11 p.m., then came home to read Jonah bedtime stories while standing, because sitting down meant I'd fall asleep. They remembered my money, my name, my status, but they forgot the woman who made it all happen. When Trent was 12 and broke his arm at Little League, I canceled a supplier trip to stay at the hospital. I lost a 6-figure contract that week. He never knew. When April miscarried the first time, I flew out to Austin, cooked for her every night, and covered their rent without asking for it back. She never said thank you. She told people later that Elaine never liked her. They forgot. And for a long time, I told myself it didn't matter, that love was love even if no one kept the receipts, that real service didn't come with applause. But now, standing in the quiet of a life I reclaimed, I let myself remember what they wouldn't. I remembered me. I remembered the year I paid off the restaurant loan in full. The day I bought my first delivery truck. The night I stood in the alley behind the bakery, crying with joy because I could finally afford to hire a second dishwasher so Maria could get home to her kids. No one toasted those moments, but they were mine. You see, the years they forgot weren't just lost time. They were my becoming, the quiet backbone of a life built not to impress, but to sustain. They forgot because I made it look easy. That's the curse of strong women, isn't it? We hold the weight so gracefully they assume it's light. They forget how much it cost us to smile, to stay, to hold the family together while slowly disappearing inside it. I went through some old boxes that week, not out of sadness, out of curiosity. Inside, I found old menus I designed by hand, business cards from 1992 with my maiden name, faded newspaper clippings calling me the Queen of Carolina Kitchens. One article quoted me, "I don't want to be remembered as successful. I want to be remembered as someone who fed people, body and soul." I read that line over and over, and I realized they forgot what I did. But I never forgot why I did it. I didn't build a business to be rich. I didn't build a home to be obeyed. I built both to create room for others, for dreams, for dignity. And just because they stopped seeing it doesn't mean it disappeared. Legacy isn't measured in who applauds. It's measured in who stands taller because you once stood beside them. And now, I no longer need their recognition, but I won't pretend it didn't hurt. It hurt to be dismissed, to be overlooked, to be cut out of stories I helped write. It hurt to be told I was too emotional, too controlling, too old-fashioned when all I ever did was show up. But healing isn't pretending it didn't hurt. It's deciding to live anyway. That's why I started writing. Not a memoir. Too dramatic. Just stories, recipes with little notes, letters to myself, and maybe one day to Jonah's children. It started with one line. They forgot, but I remember. And slowly, page by page, I rebuilt the map of who I was, not through what they saw, but through what I survived. Because that's what women like us do. We take the years they forgot, and we turn them into something they'll never forget again. My name was still on the building, but for years it was just that, a name. A label they kept for nostalgia, not for truth. Elaine Morrison had become a brand, not a woman. They used it when it suited them, erased it when it didn't. After everything fell apart, after Trent's public suspension, after the foundation's collapse, after the whispers about forged documents and missing funds, I walked past the Morrison Holdings headquarters on a quiet Wednesday morning. I hadn't been there in 3 years. The building still looked the same. Glass panels, brass logo, a lobby that smelled like synthetic lemon and money. But something had shifted. People looked up when I entered, and not with confusion or forced smiles, but with recognition. "Mrs. Morrison?" the new receptionist asked, standing up. I nodded. "I'm here to see what still has my name on it." She didn't hesitate. "Of course." Caroline had arranged the meeting quietly. No media, no announcement, no Trent, just a quiet boardroom with 5 seats, 2 attorneys, and one document I never thought I'd touch again. It was the original Founders Charter, the very paper Harold and I signed the night we mortgaged our home to open the first Morrison kitchen. The ink had faded, but our signatures were still there, bold, shaky, defiant. One of the board members looked uncomfortable. Another cleared her throat. "Ms. Morrison," she began. "We've reviewed the case," Caroline submitted. "While it's deeply unfortunate how things unfolded with your son's leadership, we believe it's time we made something right." They slid the folder toward me. Inside was a motion to restore my full legal recognition as co-founder, with authority to appoint interim board members until the next vote. I didn't smile. I didn't thank them. Instead, I pulled out my pen, the same one I used to sign my very first business license, and I wrote my name. Not with trembling, not with hesitation, with clarity. Elaine Morrison. Not a ghost, not a memory, not a burden, just a woman who was still standing. The irony? They only handed power back because the business was unraveling. They needed someone with credibility, someone the community still trusted. They had no choice but to remember me. But I didn't come back to rescue the company. I came back to reclaim my name. For too long, Trent used it to gain trust in rooms he didn't earn. April signed checks under it. PR teams marketed the Morrison Legacy while pushing me out of every decision. And I let them. Not because I was weak, but because I believed they'd protect it, that they understood where it came from. But they didn't. They thought legacy was inherited. They didn't know legacy is built. Burning your hands and bruising your feet to hold something together when everyone else walks away. After signing, I stood outside the building and looked up. It still said Morrison. But for the first time in years, I felt like it meant something again. Not status, not ego, but a return. Not to who I was before everything fell apart, but to the woman who survived it anyway. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with Jonah. He'd driven down just to see me. "Did it feel good?" he asked. "No," I said. "It felt correct." He nodded, then added, "People at school talk about you now. You're kind of a legend." I laughed. "That's nice, but I didn't do it to be a legend." "I know." "You did it so your name wouldn't be twisted." That stopped me. Because he was right. You reach a certain age and people start rewriting your story. They soften it, shrink it, or erase it altogether. And if you're not careful, your name becomes a footnote in someone else's narrative. But not mine. Not anymore. From now on, every time someone said Morrison, they'd know who earned it. Not because I shouted, but because I endured. Because I refused to disappear. If you've ever felt your name being chipped away by silence, by betrayal, by time, know this: you have every right to reclaim it, to say, that name is mine. I bled for it. I built it. I lived it. And no one, not even the ones you raised, gets to steal it just because you got quieter. Because sometimes dignity doesn't roar. Sometimes it signs its name and waits. Of all the things they tried to take from me, the house hurt the most. Not because of its value, not the porch swing Harold built by hand, not the cherry floors we refinished one blistering summer, not even the kitchen window where I used to press cookies into Jonah's tiny fingers. What cut deepest was how casually they tried to erase me from it. It happened subtly, like most betrayals. After Harold passed, I stayed, alone, but rooted. The house wasn't just a building, it was memory. It was proof that I was still here, even if no one visited on holidays anymore. Then, one day, Trent dropped it into conversation like it was nothing. "Mom, April and I have been thinking, maybe it's time you considered something smaller. That place is too much for you alone." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a setup. The next week, I found a real estate agent's card on the counter. A week after that, April sent me Zillow listings for condos in Charlotte. Then came the kicker. Trent accidentally copied me on an email to a mortgage consultant titled, "Transferring house title from mother, urgent." No, would you be open to this, Mom? No, how do you feel about your home? Just assumption, wrapped in entitlement. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just called my attorney. The deed, as it turns out, was still in my name. Fully. Harold had ensured that. Trent and April had no legal claim, no stake, no say. Still, they pushed. April staged a family dinner to talk about moving forward, only to hand me a folder with transition options, assisted living brochures, a breakdown of condo prices, an unsigned document titled Home Release Agreement. As if I was a tenant, not the woman who built that house brick by brick. I left that dinner without touching my wine. The next morning, I changed the locks. And then, quietly, like every move I'd made since this started, I drafted a will update, one that stated, explicitly, that the house would be donated to a women's shelter fund in Harold's name, not sold, not passed down, given to women who, like me, once needed space to feel safe and whole again. A month later, I hosted my own dinner, not a family one, a real one, old friends, women from the shelter board, even Caroline. We ate peach cobbler and roasted lamb and talked about what a home really meant, not a place, a promise. A few days after that, Trent showed up at my porch unannounced. "You're donating the house?" he asked, voice tight. "Yes, but this was going to be part of our estate plan." I looked him in the eye. "You don't get to plan estates you tried to steal." He stared at me like I was speaking another language. "You really think strangers deserve this more than your own family?" I took a breath. Family isn't just who shares your name, Trent. It's who respects your worth when no one's watching. And right now, those women respect me more than you ever did. He left without another word. The porch felt lighter after that. So did I. Later that week, I received a thank you letter from the shelter. They planned to name the house Elaine's Porch and use it as a transitional living space for women over 60, women who had been pushed out of their homes, often by their own children. I wept when I read it, not because I was sad, but because it finally felt like the years I gave had landed somewhere soft. You know, I'd love to know if you've ever felt that feeling of being erased in a home you paid for, that cold sting when someone calls your sacrifices clutter or your presence too much. If you've ever been made to feel like your home was no longer your own, share it in the comments. You're not alone. You built more than walls. You built love. And no one, not even family, has the right to strip that away without your say. As for me, I sit on the porch most evenings now. The same swing Harold made, freshly painted, the garden's starting to bloom again. So am I. And every time I step into the house, I don't feel guilt or fear. I feel pride. Because this home no longer belongs to people who saw it as leverage. It belongs to the woman who built it, and the women who will rise inside it. They weren't afraid of me. Not really. They were afraid of what I represented, afraid of what my legacy exposed about theirs. Because legacy, you see, isn't just about what you leave behind. It's about what you stand for while you're still breathing. Trent and April built their lives on perception. They wanted wealth that looked good in pictures, charities that looked noble on paper, and power that didn't ask where it came from. But my legacy? It wasn't polished. It was earned. Flour on my apron, receipts in shoeboxes, late nights at the back of the bakery trying to figure out how to keep the lights on without laying off Maria. They feared that kind of legacy because it made theirs look hollow. After news of the house donation spread, I started getting letters, emails, even calls, former employees, old customers, strangers who remembered eating a biscuit I made in 1987. They didn't ask for money. They weren't chasing drama. They were just reaching out to say, "We remember what you built. It mattered." And one woman wrote, "Your bakery saved my life. I was 17, pregnant, and alone. You hired me when no one else would. I work in a shelter now. Every time I make cornbread, I think of you." I read that letter 3 times, not because I doubted it, but because I needed to believe that the quiet years, the hard years, had left something that lasted. Meanwhile, Trent tried to repair what was left of his reputation. He made a video, posted it on social media, wore a navy blazer, and spoke with that calm, rehearsed voice he always used when he was lying. "We're saddened by recent misunderstandings. We're working hard to restore the community's trust." He never mentioned me, never said my name, never admitted the truth, but everyone knew. That's what terrified him most. Not the collapse of the company, not even the money, but the fact that people remembered me before they remembered him. They'd show up at Morrison Holdings and ask, "Is the founder back?" Not, "Is Trent back?" And when they found out I wasn't involved anymore, they left. Legacy isn't something you can steal. It's something people choose to carry forward. I never responded to his video, didn't post anything, didn't clap back. I just did what I'd always done. I kept working, quietly, for something that mattered. Caroline and I expanded the Herald Fund, added a program for financial literacy, focused on women over 60 who'd been cut off from family wealth or manipulated by children into signing over property. The need was overwhelming. Women came in quietly, like I had, not looking for revenge, just looking to be seen again. Jonah helped us build a website. He included a section called The Real Story Behind Morrison. I didn't want it at first. I told him, "We don't need to explain anything." He said, "You're not explaining, you're claiming, and that scares them more than anything." So we did it. We told the story, not in rage, not in shame, just truth, the kind you don't need to raise your voice to say, and slowly, people listened. The bakery, which I'd sold years ago, invited me to speak at their 50th anniversary. I stood in front of a crowd in my old apron, told them how we used to mix biscuit dough by hand because the mixer broke and we couldn't afford a new one. Told them how legacy isn't about what people remember when you're gone. It's about what lives on because you stayed. There was a standing ovation, but I wasn't crying for the applause. I was crying because for once, I didn't feel like I had to fight to be remembered. They remembered me. Not the businesswoman, not the victim, just Elaine. The legacy they feared, it was never about destroying theirs. It was about reclaiming mine. And if you're reading this, if you've ever been made to feel like your story stopped mattering after you turned 60, after your kids got degrees, after your name disappeared from the mailbox, listen to me. You're still building your legacy, even in silence, especially in silence. And they'll feel it. Not because you shouted, but because you stood. I used to rehearse what I'd say if he ever apologized. For years, I imagined the moment. Trent would show up on my porch, shoulders slumped, shame in his eyes. He'd finally see it, what he'd done, what he'd taken. He'd say the words I'd been waiting for. "I'm sorry, Mom." But as time passed, I realized I no longer needed them. Because somewhere along the way, I stopped needing him to say I mattered. I already knew. That realization didn't come suddenly. It came quietly, like most healing does. It came when I opened a letter from a woman in Nebraska who read about the Herald Fund and wrote, "You gave me courage I didn't know I had." It came when I watched Jonah help a woman fill out a housing protection form with a steadiness that reminded me of Harold. It came the night I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months, sitting in my kitchen with Caroline and her daughter, folding laundry and swapping stories about men who underestimate women. It came because, without knowing it, I had filled the space his apology used to occupy with something better, self-worth. Then one day, Trent did come. I heard his car in the gravel, the slow shuffle of feet that used to march with certainty. He looked older, not just in his face, in his spirit. He held a folder in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. "I thought I'd talk," he said. I let him in, not because I owed him anything, but because I didn't need to prove anything anymore. He sat at the same table where, 3 years ago, he'd once told me I should start thinking smaller. Now he looked small, not physically, but in that quiet way people do when they realize they aren't the main character in the story they thought they wrote. "I messed up," he began. "Not just the company. Everything. You, Jonah. The house." I said nothing. Just poured 2 glasses of water, not wine. He talked. About how everything unraveled after the audit, about how no one trusted him anymore, about how April had needed time to herself and taken the kids to her mother's, about how some nights he couldn't sleep from the weight of what he'd done. Then he said it. "I'm sorry, Mom. And here's the thing. I believed him. Not because of his voice, but because of his eyes. They finally looked empty enough to see me clearly. But I didn't cry. I didn't reach across the table. I didn't say, 'It's okay,' because it wasn't. And it didn't need to be. I just said, 'Thank you.' Not for the apology, for finally realizing who I was. He pulled out the folder. Inside were documents, official ones. He was transferring the remaining Morrison shares back to a public trust, one managed independently. He'd included a letter formally recognizing my role as founder and contributor. I thought maybe this would help repair the name, he said. I looked at the papers, neat, precise, correct, but the name didn't need repairing. He did. So I signed. Not for him, for me, because it felt good to say, yes, I'll close this door, but I won't walk through it again. When he left, I stood at the screen door and watched his car disappear down the road. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel bitter. I felt done. There's a strange peace in reaching the place where someone else's regret doesn't control you anymore. You don't forgive for their sake. You forgive because you're ready to live again without the weight of what they never gave. I poured myself a cup of tea. The house was quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the old clock Harold bought at an auction in 1982. And I thought, this is what freedom sounds like. Not cheers, not closure, just silence. Finally free of begging. If you've ever waited on an apology, and it never came, maybe you're stronger than you think. And if it did come, but it felt too late, you're not wrong for feeling that way. Sometimes the greatest revenge story isn't hearing, "I'm sorry." It's being able to say, "I didn't need it." It didn't end with a party. There were no confetti poppers, no news headlines, no triumphant music playing in the background as I walked away from the life that nearly erased me. It ended the way most real victories do, quietly, fully, without need for applause. I sold the last shares I held, declined an honorary board seat, politely refused a lifetime legacy award someone tried to give me. I didn't need a plaque to prove I mattered. I had already built something more permanent. Myself. The morning after Trent left my house, I walked through every room, slowly. Just me and the creak of the hardwood floors Harold installed with his bare hands. I ran my fingers along the wall where Jonah marked his height with a pencil. I sat on the edge of my old bed and looked out the window where I used to watch my son's car pull in, back when visits meant laughter and not power plays. And then I locked the door and left, not out of sadness, Not even out of anger. I left because I was no longer bound to proving my place in a house that didn't protect my name. A week later, I moved into a cottage outside Asheville. Smaller, yes, but mine. All mine. With a screened porch, a modest herb garden, and a stack of books I finally had time to read. No more waiting rooms, no more documents, no more defending the woman I was. I had defended her long enough. Jonah visited often. He helped hang the wind chimes from the old bakery. We made soup together. He asked about stories from my 20s. I could tell he was listening now, not out of guilt, but out of something deeper, respect. Caroline stopped by too. She brought fabric samples for the shelter home, laughed with me about the paint color we chose for the welcome room. Lavender, not too bright, not too sad. We called it Elaine's Light. One night, I sat with her daughter on the porch. She was only 21, full of fire and fearlessness. "Why didn't you ever fight back?" she asked me. "You could have dragged them through court, made them pay." I smiled. "Sweetheart, I did fight back, just not the way people expect." She looked confused. I explained, fighting back doesn't always mean raising your voice or seeking revenge. Sometimes it means not becoming bitter, not letting them define the rest of your life, choosing peace, not because they deserve it, but because you do. That was my ending. Not revenge, not reconciliation, just freedom. Freedom to wake up without waiting for an apology. Freedom to breathe without calculating how to explain my worth. Freedom to be seen not as a burden or a relic or an asset, but as a woman who had lived, lost, and loved fully. Some nights I still think about the house, not with longing, more like gratitude. That chapter gave me everything I needed to write the next one. A quiet ending, a real beginning. And to you, dear listener, yes, you still watching at this point, maybe you're waiting for that quiet ending too. Maybe you've been overlooked, used, spoken over. Maybe they took what you built and slapped their names on it. Maybe they made you feel like you were too much when they needed you, and too little when you needed them. If that's you, I want you to hear this. You do not need their permission to reclaim your worth. You do not need their apology to start again. You do not need their recognition to prove your story matters. Sometimes the most powerful legacy you leave is the life you choose after they stop looking. So now I'll ask you, have you ever been through something like this? Have you ever had to start again, not with noise, but with strength? If you feel comfortable, share it in the comments. Your voice may be the one another woman needs tonight, because in this quiet, healing corner of the world, we don't erase women like us. We remember, we rebuild, and we begin again on our own terms.